Welcome to Ripper's Nighttime Tales, a chilling series of bedtime horror stories narrated by the horror streamer Mr. Rippers with soft rain and thunder. Dripped off to multiple scary tales perfect for late night listening on rumble.com. Do hit that like button and consider following the channel. Leave a comment letting me know where and when you listen. Let's build a community. Okay, let's get started. The kept body. The air inside the house wasn't just stale, it was thick. A physical weight that pressed against the eardrums and coated the tongue with a taste like copper and spoiled milk. The blue lights of the cruisers outside cut through the heavy curtains, slashing the living room with rhythmic, strobing bars of illumination. They didn't help. The darkness in the corners of 42 Harrow Lane didn't retreat from the light, it seemed to drink it. Two officers in full hazmat gear stood in the doorway of the living room. I could hear the muffled sound of their breathing through the respirators, the heavy, labored intake of air that had been scrubbed of the atrocity hanging in the room. Even through the filters, I knew they could smell it. You couldn't filter out a smell like that. It wasn't just biology, it was the smell of bad choices fermenting into madness. "Clear the back," one of them radioed, his voice distorted, tinny. We have a body." He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the recliner in the center of the room. It was a beige La-Z boy, once plush, now stained with fluids that had turned the fabric black and stiff. Duct tape, silver and peeling, was wrapped around the armrests. "Jesus," the second cop whispered. "Look at the wrists." I sat in the corner, on the floor, my knees pulled to my chest. They hadn't noticed me yet, or maybe they had, and they just couldn't process what they were seeing. My phone was in my hand. The screen was cracked, the battery dead. Is he twitching?" the first cop asked, taking a step back, his boot crunching on a layer of dead flies that carpeted the floor like brittle confetti. "Nerves," the other said, though his voice wavered. "Just gases, releasing. It happens." "No," the first one said, raising his flashlight. "I swear to God," the fingers moved. "I wanted to tell them it wasn't nerves. I wanted to tell them that the movement was the only thing holding the house together, but my mouth was sewn shut. Not literally, not yet, but the fear had stitched my lips with an invisible thread so tight I felt the tension in my jaw. I closed my eyes, and the blue lights vanished, replaced by the memory of how it started. The silence, the debt, the cold, logical decision that led us to hell. It began with the silence. Elliot Graff was a man who made noise. He was 82 years of heavy breathing, wet coughing, and the constant, grinding mechanical hum of the motorized recliner he practically lived in. He was my job. I was a home health aide, officially, though in reality I was a glorified babysitter for a man whose own children had decided his money was worth more than his company. I didn't mind him. He was mean, sure. He threw soup bowls when they weren't hot enough and accused me of stealing his silverware every Tuesday. But he was consistent, and he paid, or rather, the state paid, and his pension paid, and the disability checks paid, my brother, Toby. And I lived in a 2-room shoebox 3 streets over. Toby was 24 but acted 16, permanently stuck in a state of suspended adolescence since Mom died. He worked odd jobs, stocking shelves, washing cars, but he had a hole in his hands where money fell through. Gambling apps, crypto scams, bad loans. I was the wall standing between us and the street, and Elliot Graff was the mortar. On a Tuesday in November, I unlocked Elliot's front door with my key. The house was usually freezing, Elliot was cheap with the heat, but today it felt colder, a stillness that went down to the bone. "Elliot," I called out, dropping my bag on the entryway table. "I brought the low-sodium crackers you hate." No answer. Usually, he'd be shouting for his pills by now. I walked into the living room. The TV was on, playing a rerun of The Price is Right. The colors were oversaturated, orange and yellow washing over the room. Elliot was in the chair. His head was tipped back, mouth open, his dentures slipping slightly forward. His eyes were half open, staring at a spot on the ceiling where a water stain looked like a map of Florida. "Elliot?" I touched his hand. It was wax. Not cold yet, not fully, but the heat was fleeing, retreating deep inside him. No pulse, no breath, just the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen and the cheering of the studio audience on the TV. I stood there for a long time. I didn't scream, I didn't cry. I was too tired for melodrama. I just felt a heavy, dull thud in my stomach. Unemployment, I thought. Eviction. I checked his neck again. Nothing. I looked at the clock on the wall. 10:14 a.m. The first of the month was in 3 days. The mail was sitting on the side table. I saw the edges of the envelopes. Pension fund. Social Security. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Toby. Asterisk, landlord was here. Said if we don't have the full 1,200 by Friday, he's changing the locks. I'm sorry, Mara. I tried to get in advance. Asterisk. I looked at Elliot. He looked peaceful in a gross, slack-jawed way. He didn't need the money anymore. He didn't have anyone. His daughter lived in Seattle and hadn't visited in 6 years. His son was in prison in Florida. I looked at the checks on the table. I didn't call 911. I sat on the sofa opposite the corpse and did the math. If I called it in now, the coroner would come. The accounts would be frozen by the end of the week. The next check wouldn't clear. We would be on the street by Monday. But if I didn't call, if Elliot Graff was just sleeping for a few days, I picked up the phone and typed, "Don't worry about the rent. I'll fix it." Then I walked over to the thermostat and turned it down as low as it would go in 55 degrees. I went to the windows and checked the seals. "Just for a little while, Elliot," I whispered. My voice sounded loud in the dead room. "Just until we get back on our feet." Elliot didn't argue. He just stared at the ceiling. Toby took it better than I thought he would. That should have scared me. "He's dead?" Toby asked, standing in the doorway of Elliot's living room that evening. He wouldn't come all the way in. He kept rubbing his arms like he was cold. "Heart attack, I think. Or a stroke. It was quick." "And we're just leaving him there?" "We're not leaving him," I said, snapping on latex gloves. I had a box of them in my bag. "We're preserving the status quo. Just for 2 months, Toby. That's it. 3 checks. That covers the back rent, your loan shark, and gives us a deposit for a cheaper place." "This is fraud, Mara. This is like felony fraud." "Homelessness is worse," I said flatly. "Help me with his legs." "I can't touch him." "Toby, grab his legs." We had to move him to change the sheets on the recliner. He had voided his bladder when he died. The smell was faint, mostly ammonia, sharp and stinging. We cleaned him up with sponge baths and baby powder. It was grotesque clinical work. I treated him like a piece of furniture that needed reupholstering. We put him back in the chair. We dressed him in fresh pajamas, flannel, button-up. I combed his remaining wisps of gray hair. "He looks okay," Toby said, voice trembling. From a distance. "We keep the curtains closed," I instructed. "Lights off or low. If anyone comes to the door, he's sleeping, he's sick. Flu, COVID, whatever keeps people away." "What about the smell?" Toby asked. "It's gonna get bad, Mara. I watched a documentary. Putrefaction starts in like 48 hours. "We manage it," I said. "AC on full blast, dehumidifiers, bleach in the drains, and we seal the room." We spent the night taping plastic sheeting over the vents. We rolled towels under the doors. We created a tomb. When we left that night, I locked the door and felt a strange vibration in the key, a hum, like the house was holding its breath, waiting for us to come back. Day 4. The smell arrived on schedule. It wasn't the rot yet. It was sweeter. Sickeningly sweet, like overripe peaches left in a hot car, mixed with the chemical bite of the air fresheners we'd plugged into every outlet. I came in at 8 a.m. The house was freezing. The silence was absolute. "Morning, Elliot," I said. The habit died hard. I checked the body. The rigor mortis had set in and was now beginning to pass, leaving him strangely floppy in places. His skin was turning a grayish green, the color of old bruising. I sat at his small desk and opened his laptop. I had his passwords. He'd made me write them down in a notebook because he couldn't remember them. Bank of America, login, balance, $14,250.44. I transferred $2,000 to a prepaid debit card we had bought. I felt a spike of adrenaline, hot and prickly, running down my neck. I waited for a siren. I waited for the screen to flash red. Transfer complete. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. "Thank you, Elliot," I said. I looked at him. His head was tilted slightly to the left. I frowned. I was sure I had propped it straight on the pillow yesterday. I walked over, my shoes clicking on the hardwood. I grabbed his chin, wearing gloves, and gently pushed his head back to center. The skin felt wrong, tacky, like cooling wax. "Stay," I whispered. I went to the kitchen to bleach the sink. When I came back 10 minutes later, his head was tilted to the left again. I froze. I stared at him. The angle was identical. "Gravity," I muttered. "Just gravity. The pillow is sagging." I fixed it again. This time, I wedged a rolled-up towel next to his ear to hold it in place. I left quickly that day. I didn't like the way the shadows stretched across the floor, long and thin, reaching for the chair. Day 12. The flies were the next sign. Not the small fruit flies. These were large, iridescent blue bottles. They were sluggish, drunk on the cold air, buzzing in low, jagged circles around the recliner. Toby was losing it. He was supposed to take the night shifts. Just to make sure no one broke in, to keep the lights flickering so the neighbors saw activity. "I can't do it, Mara," he hissed. We were in the kitchen, the door to the living room shut. "I hear things. It's an old house, Toby. Pipes bang, wood settles. Not like this," he said, his eyes wide and rimmed with red. "It's the TV. I turn it off, and an hour later, it's on again. But it's just static, and the volume is all the way up. You're falling asleep on the remote." "I'm not." He grabbed my arm. "And the breathing. Mara, I swear to God, I hear breathing. He is dead, Toby. Dead things don't breathe. That's the definition." "Then what is it?" "It's the wind in the chimney. It's the draft." I pushed past him and went into the living room. The smell was heavier now. The sweetness had soured into something foul, a meat locker stench that clung to your clothes. I had to breathe through my mouth. Elliot sat in his throne. The towel I had used to prop his head was on the floor. I stared at it. "Did you move the towel, Toby?" "I didn't go in there," Toby said from the hallway. "I told you, I stay in the kitchen." I picked up the towel. It was damp, not with water. It was stained with a dark, viscous fluid. Leakage. I gagged, tossing the towel into a trash bag. "We need to retape him," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "He's sliding. We need to secure him to the chair so he doesn't slump." "I'm not touching him," Toby said. "You want the money? You want the loan shark off your back? Then get the duct tape." We taped his wrists to the wooden arms of the recliner. We taped his ankles to the footrest. It felt like a desecration, a step beyond the fraud into something ritualistic. As I wound silver tape around his left wrist, I felt a vibration, a hum in the bone. I pulled my hand back. "Did you feel that?" "What?" Toby asked, holding the tape roll, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cold. "Nothing. I finished the job." When we were done, Elliot looked like a prisoner in his own home. The TV was off. The reflection in the black screen showed the two of us standing over him, distorted and stretched. And for a second, just a fraction of a second, I saw a third figure standing behind the chair in the reflection. Tall, indistinct. I whipped around. Nothing but the drawn curtains and the peeling wallpaper. Let's go, I said. We're done for today. Day 20. The letter came from the bank, a random security verification. They wanted a video check-in. Apparently, the algorithm had flagged the sudden transfer activity on an account that had been dormant for years. We're screwed, Toby said, pacing the tiny kitchen of our apartment. They know. They don't know, I said, reading the letter. They just want to see his face, verify he's alive. It's a standard anti-fraud measure for seniors. He's green, Mara. He's literally rotting. How are we going to put him on FaceTime? Makeup, I said. Lighting. Bandwidth issues. I was calm. I was terrified, but the terror had crystallized into a cold, hard resolve. I wasn't going to prison. Not for this. Not after coming this far. We went back to the house. The smell hit us like a physical blow when we opened the door. It was no longer just rot. It was earthy, fungal. I walked into the living room and stopped. Mold, black, velvety mold, was blooming on the wall behind the recliner. It wasn't random spots. It grew in spirals, tight geometric swirls that looked like eyes. Don't look at the wall, I told Toby. Set up the laptop. I went to work on Elliot. I used the heavy foundation I'd bought at the drugstore, plastering it over the gray-green skin. I used rouge on his cheeks. I put sunglasses on him, then decided that was too suspicious, and took them off. His eyes were cloudy, sunken, the corneas milky white. He has cataracts, I muttered. It's fine. The worst part was the jaw. It hung open. The rigor had fully passed, and the muscles had dissolved. I found a needle and heavy thread in the sewing kit. Don't, Toby whispered, watching me. Mara, please don't. He has to keep his mouth shut, I said. I passed the needle through the lower lip, then the upper. I tied it inside, pulling the jaw closed. It made a wet, tearing sound. My hands were shaking, but I didn't stop. We set the laptop on the TV tray. I adjusted the lighting so the lamp was behind him, casting his face in shadow. I smeared a little Vaseline on the laptop camera lens to blur the image. Okay, I said. You crouch behind the chair. If he starts to slump, you hold him up. I can't. Do it, Toby. I initiated the call. The screen rang. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. Connecting. A young woman appeared on the screen. She looked bored. Mr. Graff? I sat just out of frame, to the side. He's here, I said. I'm his aide, Mara. He's not feeling well today. Vocal cords are a bit paralyzed from a stroke, but he can hear you. The woman squinted. I need to see him clearly. I nudged the laptop closer. Elliot sat there, painted and stitched, staring into the void. Mr. Graff, can you nod if you can hear me? The woman asked. I kicked the back of the recliner hard. The chair jolted. Elliot's head bobbed. Okay, the woman said, typing something. I just need to verify the last 4 digits of your social. He can't speak, I said. I can give them to you. I need him to verify, she said. Can he write it down? Panic flared. His hands are arthritis-ridden. He can't hold a pen, the woman sighed. She looked at Elliot on the screen. Then the glitch happened. The video feed froze. Digital artifacts, neon green and purple squares, tore across the screen. The audio turned into a high-pitched screech, like metal grinding on metal. In the frozen image on the screen, Elliot's face changed. The pixels shifted. The painted eyelids seemed to snap open wider than physically possible. The stitched mouth seemed to grin, tearing the thread. It wasn't Elliot. It was something looking through Elliot. Whoa, the woman said, her voice cutting through the static. Sorry, bad connection. The feed is going crazy. On the screen, the Elliot thing was looking directly at me. Not at the camera. At me, sitting off to the side. Mr. Graff? The woman asked. Suddenly, the feed cleared. Elliot was just a corpse again, slump and painted. Okay, I verified the visual ID, the woman said, sounding eager to hang up. That's all we needed. Have a good day. The screen went black. I sat there, trembling. Did you see that? Toby whispered from behind the chair. Mara, on the screen, he looked at you. It was lag, I said. Pixelation. He looked at you. Shut up, I screamed. I stood up, knocking the chair over. I looked at Elliot. He was motionless, but the room felt heavier. The air was charged with static electricity. The hair on my arms stood up. From the wall behind the chair, a single drop of black mold water dripped onto the floor. Drip, we got the money, I said, my voice hollow. We're safe for another month. But as we packed up, I noticed something. The duct tape on his left wrist. It was loose, stretched, like he had been pulling against it. Day 33, the house began to change. It wasn't just the mold anymore, it was the geometry. The hallway to the bathroom felt longer than it should be. The doors stuck in their frames, swollen with moisture that wasn't there. I stopped sleeping. When I did sleep, I dreamt of the recliner. I dreamt I was sitting in it, and the leather was skin, and it was wrapping around me, digesting me. I went to the house alone now. Toby refused to go. He sat in our apartment, watching the door, clutching a crucifix he'd bought at a pawn shop. I had to go. I had to maintain the body. The smell had changed again. It was no longer organic. It smelled like ozone and burning hair. I entered the living room. The flies were gone. All of them. I looked at the floor. They were dead. Arranged in a perfect circle around the recliner, 3 deep. A barrier. Elliot? I whispered. The corpse was deteriorating. The skin was sloughing off the bone. The jaw had torn through the stitches, hanging loose again. But it was the eyes that stopped me. The milky cataracts were gone. The eyes were black, pitch black, shining like oil, and they were wet. I walked closer, drawn by a morbid curiosity I couldn't control. You're just a shell, I said. You're just meat. Crack. The sound came from the kitchen. I spun around. Toby? No answer. Drag, drag, drag. The sound of something heavy being pulled across the linoleum. I walked to the kitchen doorway. It was empty. The back door was locked. I turned back to the living room. Elliot's head was turned. He was looking at the kitchen. I felt a cold hand squeeze my heart. I hadn't touched him. I backed away. I'm leaving now. I grabbed my bag. As I reached the front door, the lights flickered and died. Total darkness. In the dark, I heard the recliner creak, the sound of springs compressing and releasing. Creak, snap, the sound of duct tape tearing. I fumbled for the doorknob, blind panic rising in my throat. I tore the door open and fell out onto the porch, gasping for air. I looked back into the dark house. 2 points of light reflected from the street lamps were shining from the living room, not from the chair, from the middle of the room. Standing height, I slammed the door and ran. Day 40. The debt collector's name was Vargas. He was a thick-necked man in a cheap suit who smelled of tobacco and aggression. He caught me outside the apartment. Your brother owes my employer a significant sum, Vargas said, blocking my path. He says you have it. I'm getting it, I said. Next week? Today, Vargas said. Or I start breaking fingers. Toby's first, then yours. He followed me. I didn't lead him to the apartment. I led him to 42 Harrow Lane. I didn't have a plan. I just knew I couldn't take him home. Who lives here? Vargas asked, sneering at the peeling paint. My client. He has cash in a safe. I'll get it. I'm coming in with you. I unlocked the door. The smell hit us. Christ, Vargas coughed, covering his nose. What the hell died in here? A raccoon? Bad plumbing, I lied. Wait in the living room. Vargas walked in. It was late afternoon, but the curtains were drawn. The room was dim. He saw the figure in the chair. "Who's the stiff?" Vargas asked, stepping over the circle of dead flies. He didn't seem to notice the strangeness of it. He was a predator, focused on prey, ignoring the environment. "That's Mr. Graff. He's sleeping." "He stinks," Vargas said. He walked right up to the recliner. "Hey, old man, wake up." I stood by the door, hand on the light switch. I felt the hum in the wall. It was violent now, a vibration that rattled my teeth. "Don't touch him," I said softly. Vargas laughed. He reached out and poked Elliot's shoulder. "Wake up, Grandpa." The finger sank into the shoulder, like poking rotten fruit. Vargas pulled his hand back, looking at the slime on his finger with disgust. "What the F?" The door slammed shut behind me. I didn't touch it. The lock clicked. "Open the door," Vargas growled, turning to me. "The lights went out. Open the damn door, bitch." I heard Vargas fumbling for his gun. The slide racked. Then, from the corner of the room, a sound, a wet, gargling intake of breath. "Who's there?" Vargas yelled. I pressed myself against the wood of the door, closing my eyes. Creak. The recliner. "Stay back," Vargas shouted. Bang. The muzzle flash lit up the room for a microsecond. In that flash, I saw it. Elliot wasn't in the chair. He was unfolding. That was the only word for it. He was rising from the chair, but his limbs were too long, extra joints snapping into place. The robe hung off him like a shroud. The black mold from the wall was reaching out, tendrils connecting to his back like puppet strings. Bang, bang. "It won't die," Vargas screamed. "Why won't it die?" There was a sound like a wet towel snapping, a crunch of bone. Vargas screamed, a high, thin sound that was cut off abruptly. Then, the sound of tearing. Wet, sloppy eating sounds. I slid down the door, hands over my ears, humming to myself to drown it out. Silence returned. The lights flickered back on, dim and yellow. The recliner was occupied. Vargas was sitting in it. His eyes were wide, staring at the ceiling. His wrists were taped to the arms with fresh silver tape. Elliot, the body was gone. I looked around the room. The black mold on the wall had changed shape. It looked like a face now, Elliot's face. I walked over to Vargas. He was dead. His neck was broken at an impossible angle. I saw his phone in his lap. I picked it up. A text message draft was open. Collection complete. Payment received. I looked at the bank app on his phone. A transfer had been initiated from Elliot's account to Vargas's employer. The entity didn't just want flesh. It wanted the transaction. It was feeding on the greed. Vargas came for money, and the house paid him. I backed away. I had to get Toby. We had to burn it down. Day 45? We have to go back, I told Toby. No, he sobbed. He was curled up on his bed. Vargas is missing. The cops are asking questions. Exactly. We have to destroy the evidence. We have to burn the house, Toby. If we don't, they'll find Vargas in the chair. They'll find the traces of Elliot. I can't go there. You have to. I can't carry the gas cans alone. I dragged him. I was possessed by a frantic energy. I felt the house pulling at me, a magnet in my blood. It wanted us back. It wasn't done. We parked the car a block away. We carried 2 red jerry cans of gasoline. It was midnight. The front door was standing open. It knows, Toby whimpered. Just pour the gas and light it, I commanded. Living room first. We walked in. The smell was gone. That was worse. The air was sterile, cold, like a vacuum. We entered the living room. Vargas was gone. The recliner was empty. Where is he? Toby asked, spinning around. Where's Vargas? Where's Elliot? Just pour. I uncapped my can and started splashing gasoline on the curtains, the rug, the walls. Toby stood near the center of the room, holding his can. He was staring at the floor. Mara, he said, The floor is soft. What? The wood. It's soft. He took a step, and the floorboards bowed like rubber. Move! I shouted. Toby tried to run, but his foot sank through the wood. Not broke through, sank. The wood rippled like liquid. It swallowed his ankle. Help! He screamed, dropping the gas can. I lunged for him, grabbing his hand. The floor around the recliner began to bubble. Pale, thin hands, dozens of them pushed up from the wood. They weren't human hands. They were made of the house splinters and mold and wire. They grabbed Toby's legs. Mara, I pulled. I pulled until my shoulder popped. Let me go, Toby shrieked. He was sinking fast, to his waist, to his chest. The recliner spun around. Sitting in it was Elliot, but it wasn't the corpse. It was a thing made of the house's rot, wearing Elliot's skin like a suit that was 2 sizes too small. The face was stretched tight, the mouth unhinged. Payment. The thing croaked. It sounded like Toby's voice mixed with Elliot's. Payment due. Take the money, I screamed at it. Take the damn money. Flesh is currency, it whispered. The hands dragged Toby down. He looked at me, eyes wide with betrayal, before his head vanished beneath the liquid floorboards. The wood hardened instantly. I was alone. I stood there, gasping, the fumes of gasoline burning my throat. The thing in the chair stood up. It towered over me. It smelled of earth and old money. You kept me, it said. You kept the body. Now I keep you. I fumbled for the lighter in my pocket. No, it said. The lighter flew from my hand, smacking into the wall. The shadows in the room surged forward. They wrapped around my wrists, cold and tight like duct tape. I have a vacancy, the entity whispered. The chair is empty. It reached out a hand. The fingers were long, tipped with bone. I screamed, but the sound didn't leave the room. The house swallowed it. The neighbors reported the smell again a week later. They said it was different this time, less like rot, more like something burning slowly, eternally. When the police finally broke down the door, the hazmat team, the blue lights, they found the living room exactly as it had been. The TV was on, playing static. The recliner was in the center of the room. Sitting in it was a woman, me. My wrists were taped to the armrests. My eyes were sewn shut with thick black thread. My skin was pale, waxy, preserved. In my lap, clutched in stiff, dead fingers, was my phone. One of the cops leaned in, shining his light on the screen. It's a bank statement, he said, voice trembling. The screen showed a new account. Mara and Elliot Trust. Balance $1,200,000. Look at her mouth, the other cop whispered. My lips were stitched together, but the corners were turned up. A smile. I think she moved, the cop said, backing away. I swear to God, she just smiled. The lights in the house flickered, the TV volume spiked, and from the crawl space beneath the floorboards, a young man's voice began to scream, muffled and distant, as if from miles underground. Payment received. The scream cut off as abruptly as a radio cord being yanked from the wall. I was standing on the porch when it happened, my hand hovering over the holster at my hip. The 2 patrol officers, Miller and Kowalski, were already scrambling backward down the steps, their faces drained of blood, boots skidding on the wet wood. She moved. Miller was stammering, his voice cracking like a teenager's. Sarge, I swear to God, the Vic, she looked at me. Secure the perimeter, I barked, keeping my voice level, though the hair on the back of my neck was standing straight up. I'm Detective Silas Vance, and I don't believe in ghosts. I believe in rigor mortis, muscle spasms, and the tricks light plays on adrenaline-soaked retinas. And get that hazmat team up here, now. I watched them retreat to the safety of the cruiser's headlights before I turned back to the open door of 42 Harold Lane. The smell rolling out of that hallway wasn't just death. I've worked homicide in this city for 15 years. I know the scent of a body left in a sealed room for a month. This was different. It was layered. Underneath the biological rot was a cloying, sugary scent like burnt caramel and cheap incense, and beneath that, something sharp and metallic, like the air after a lightning strike. Ozone. I pulled my collar up over my nose and stepped across the threshold. The house felt pressurized. That was the only way to describe it. It was like stepping into a submarine or an airplane cabin, a subtle pop in the ears. The silence was heavy, oppressive, suffocating, the sounds of the sirens wailing in the distance. "Police," I announced. The word fell flat, absorbed instantly by the peeling wallpaper. I moved down the hallway, flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. The floorboards groaned under my boots, but the sound was wet, spongy. The air was cold, far colder than the humid night outside should allow. My breath plumed in front of me in jagged bursts. I reached the living room doorway and stopped. I've seen crime scenes that would make a butcher vomit. I've seen gang hits, crimes of passion, ritualistic killings, but this was something else. It was theatrical. It was a tableau constructed with meticulous, insane precision. The woman in the recliner, Mara, according to the ID the patrol boys had run, was the centerpiece. She was small, frail-looking, swallowed by the massive, dark leather of the chair. Her skin was a translucent gray, like wax paper stretched over bone. The duct tape binding her wrists to the armrests was silver and stark against the dark wood, applied with zero slack. But it was the face that held me. The stitching on the eyes was crude. Thick black thread pierced through the delicate skin of the lids, knotted tightly. The mouth, Miller had said she smiled. I stepped closer, skirting the strange, dark circle of dead flies on the rug. The lips were sewn shut in the center, but the corners were free. As the skin had dried and tightened, it had pulled back. It wasn't a smile. It was a rictus, a grimace of dried meat. But in the flickering light of the television, which was hissing white noise, it did look like a smirk, a knowing, hateful smirk. "Jesus!" I muttered, crouching down, careful not to touch anything. Her hands were clenched in her lap. The phone Miller had mentioned was there, the screen dark now. I donned a pair of fresh latex gloves and gently pressed the home button. The battery was at 1%. The screen flared to life, casting a sickly blue glow on Mara's stitched face. Bank of America, Mara and Elliott Trust. Balance $1,200,000. The transaction history was open. A deposit made 3 hours ago. Source: life insurance payout E. Graff. "You killed him for the payout," I whispered to the corpse. And then someone, "What? Did this to you?" It didn't add up. The precision of the sewing, the staging. This wasn't a robbery gone wrong. This was a shrine. I stood up, my knees cracking in the cold. I looked around the room. The shadows in the corners seemed to be lagging, moving a fraction of a second slower than my flashlight beam. I blinked, rubbing my eyes. Fatigue. Just fatigue. Then I heard it. It wasn't a scream this time. It was a scratch. Scritch. 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 It was coming from the floor. Specifically, from the hardwood planks, directly beneath the recliner. I shone my light on the floor. The wood there looked warped, the grain swirling in unnatural fluid patterns. It looked less like oak and more like a bruise. "Is someone down there?" I shouted, stomping my boot on the floor. "Police! Can you hear me?" The scratching stopped. Then, a voice. It didn't travel through the air. It vibrated up through the soles of my boots, traveling through my bones before it hit my ears. Help. It was faint, muffled by earth and timber. A young man's voice. "I've got a possible survivor in the crawl space," I yelled into my radio, but all I got back was a screech of static that nearly deafened me. I checked the display. No signal. Damn it. I looked for a way down. There had to be a trapdoor, a vent, something. I scanned the room, the kitchen. There was usually access in the pantry or a closet. I moved toward the kitchen, but as I passed the television, the static changed. The white noise deepened, turning into a rhythmic thrum. Thump thump, thump thump. A heartbeat. I stopped. I turned slowly back to the recliner. Mara's head was tilted. I knew for a fact that her head had been resting against the back of the chair a moment ago, straight up. Now, it was lolling to the left, the ear pressed against the leather. "Miller?" I called out, my hand drifting to my gun again. "You guys come back in here?" Silence. I stared at the corpse. The chest was still. No breath. She was dead. Stone dead. The shift was just gravity, the body settling as the rigor faded or the temperature changed. "Don't lose it, Vance," I whispered to myself. I turned back to the kitchen. The linoleum floor was sticky. There was a faint trail of something viscous, dried slime, maybe mold, leading from the back door to the center of the room, where it vanished into the floorboards. I found the crawlspace hatch in the bottom of the pantry. It was a square of plywood with a rusted iron ring. I holstered my weapon and grabbed the ring. It was cold, biting into my palm through the glove. I pulled. It didn't budge. It felt welded shut. "Hang on!" I shouted at the floor. "I'm coming!" I braced my foot against the doorframe and heaved with everything I had. The wood didn't lift. Instead, the iron ring snapped off in my hand. I stumbled back, hitting the counter. The kitchen light bulb overhead popped with a loud bang, raining distinct shards of glass down onto my shoulders. Darkness swamped the kitchen. The only light now came from the living room, the pale, strobing glow of the static-filled TV. And in that strobe, I saw the shadow in the doorway. It wasn't a person. It was too tall. The proportions all wrong. The arms hung down past the knees. It was standing just inside the living room, blocking my path to the front door. I froze. My breath caught in a painful lump in my throat. I slowly reached for my flashlight on my belt. Click. The beam cut through the dark. Empty. The doorway was empty. Just the peeling paint and the dust motes dancing in the air. I let out a breath. A ragged, shaky sound. Okay. Enough of this. I needed to get out. I needed a crowbar from the cruiser, and I needed backup that wasn't wetting their pants. I stepped out of the kitchen, gun drawn now, keeping the flashlight trained on the living room. Mara was still in the chair, but the chair had turned. It was facing the kitchen now, facing me. The silver tape on her left wrist was torn. Her arm was dangling loose, the hand pointing a stiff, dead finger at the floorboards. I stopped dead. My rational mind was trying to fire. Someone is in here. Someone moved the body. It's a suspect hiding in the shadows, but my lizard brain was screaming that I was prey. "Police!" I roared, the volume startling even me. "Come out with your hands up." The TV volume escalated. The heartbeat sound and the static grew louder, faster. Thump thump, thump thump. Then words cut through the noise. They weren't coming from the TV speakers. They were coming from Mara. Her sewn-shut mouth didn't move. The throat didn't vibrate. But the sound originated from her, a dry, papery whisper that sounded like dead leaves skittering on pavement. I verified the transaction. I took a step back. "Who's there?" "Insufficient funds," the corpse whispered. The phone in her lap lit up again. It buzzed, vibrating against her dead legs. I shouldn't have done it. I should have turned and ran out the back door, glass and all, but I'm a detective. I need to know. I stepped forward, keeping the gun trained on her face, and looked at the phone screen. A new notification. New deposit pending S. Vance. Description, witness fee. The blood drained from my face. My name. How did it have my name? The floorboards beneath my feet softened. It happened so fast I couldn't react. One second I was standing on solid oak, the next I was standing on something that felt like wet sponge. My boots sank an inch, then two. What the? I tried to lift my right foot. It was stuck. The wood seemed to be suctioning onto the leather, wrapping around my ankle. I looked down. The grain of the wood was moving, swirling, forming shapes that looked like grasping fingers. No. I grunted, yanking my leg. From the crawl space beneath me, the muffled voice screamed again, closer this time, right under my feet. "Don't let it take the commission! Run!" I lunged for the hallway, throwing my weight forward. My boot tore free with a sickening ripping sound, leaving the sole behind in the floor. I scrambled onto the rug, the only surface that seemed stable. The recliner creaked. I looked up. Mara was sitting up straight. The tape on her other wrist snapped pop like a gunshot. Her hands, gray and claw-like, reached up. She grabbed the black thread, sealing her eyes. "Don't," I whispered, paralysis seizing my chest. With a wet, tearing noise, she ripped the stitches out. Her eyes were gone. The sockets were empty, filled only with the same black, velvety mold that stained the walls. But deep in that darkness, something shimmered, something digital. Green pixels. "Processing," she gargled, her jaw working against the stitches in her lips until the thread snapped and her mouth fell open, unhinged and impossibly wide. A swarm of flies erupted from her mouth. They hit me like a blast of buckshot, buzzing, biting, blinding me. I flailed, firing my gun blindly into the ceiling, bam, bam, just to make a noise, just to break the spell. I rolled backward, scrambling on my elbows and heels, kicking at the air. I hit the wall near the front door and clawed my way up. I found the knob. I twisted it, locked. I had left it open. I knew I had left it open. "Open up!" I screamed, pounding on the wood. "Miller, Carol!" Elski. Outside, through the frosted glass, I saw the flashing blue lights of the cruisers. They were right there, 10 feet away. "Help!" I looked back into the room. The flies had dispersed, settling on the walls in geometric patterns, spirals. Mara was standing. She had risen from the chair. She was tiny, barely 5 feet tall, but her shadow stretched up the wall and across the ceiling, engulfing the room. She stood on the soft, rippling floorboards, without sinking. She took a step toward me. Her movements were jerky, stop motion, missing frames of reality. One moment she was by the chair, the next she was 3 feet closer. "You saw," she rasped. The voice was hers, but overlaid with a dozen others. Elliot Graff, the debt collector Vargas, the brother Toby. A chorus of the damned. Witness, signature required. She held out the phone. "I'm not signing anything," I snarled, leveling my gun at her chest. "Stay back. The ledger must balance." She tilted her head, the neck cracking audibly. "You have debt, Silas." My heart hammered. My divorce. The gambling debts I'd hidden from the department. The loans I'd taken to pay for my daughter's rehab. "How do you know that?" "The house audits," she said. She, lunged. It wasn't a physical run. It was a glitch. She simply ceased to be there and appeared directly in front of me, her cold, mold-smelling breath washing over my face. Her hand, the fingers elongated, the nails black clamped onto my wrist, right over the pulse. It burned. It felt like liquid nitrogen and battery acid. The cold shot up my arm, seizing the muscles. My gun clattered to the floor. "Accepted," she hissed. The floor beneath me gave way. This time, there was no resistance. The wood liquefied completely. I dropped like a stone into the dark, wet crawl space beneath. I fell hard, landing in mud and jagged debris. The wind was knocked out of me. Above the rectangle of light, the hole in the living room floor began to seal shut. The wood knit itself back together like healing skin. No. I scrambled up, clawing at the underside of the floorboards. I hammered my fists against the wood. It was solid again, hard as stone. I was trapped. Hello? The voice came from the darkness beside me. I fumbled for my flashlight. I had dropped it in the fall. I patted the mud, my hands shaking uncontrollably. My fingers brushed cold metal. I grabbed it and clicked it on. The beam cut through the crawl space. It was a low, dirt-floored tunnel, smelling of wet earth and copper. Huddled in the corner, pressed against the foundation stones, was a young man, Toby. He looked like he had been buried for weeks. His clothes were shredded, his skin caked in mud and the black mold. His eyes were wide, the pupils blown so large they were almost entirely black. He held a finger to his lips. "Shh," he whispered, trembling. "Don't let the interest rate go up." "Kid," I wheezed, crawling toward him. "We have to get out. Where's the exit?" "There is no exit," Toby said, a manic giggle bubbling up in his throat. "We're in the account now. We're the assets." "Shut up," I said, trying to steady my breathing. "I'm a police officer. My team is right upstairs." Toby pointed up at the floorboards above our heads. I listened. I could hear footsteps, heavy, confident footsteps, walking across the living room floor. "That's them," I said, relief flooding me. "That's the hazmat team. Hey, down here." I banged on the wood with the flashlight. "No," Toby whispered, tears cutting tracks through the grime on his face. "That's not them." The footsteps stopped directly above us. Then a voice, muffled by the floorboards, but unmistakable. It was my voice. "Scene is secure," the voice said upstairs. "Looks like a double homicide. Suspects fled out the back. I'm going to pursue." My blood turned to ice. "That's me," I whispered. That's my voice." "It kept the body," Toby said, staring into the dark. "But it likes to trade up. It wears the ones with authority now. It wears the ones people trust." Above us, the front door opened and closed. The footsteps faded. Silence returned to the crawl space. Then, from the darkness deeper in the tunnel, where the foundations of the house rotted into the earth, a soft, mechanical whirring started. Click, whir, click, like a receipt printer. "It's printing," Toby whimpered, curling into a ball. "It's calculating the next cycle." I shone the light down the tunnel. The dirt floor was moving. Not mud. It was composed of millions of dead flies, shifting and churning like a black ocean. And rising from the pile, gleaming in the flashlight beam, was the corner of a leather recliner. It was down here with us. I looked at my wrist, where the corpse had touched me. The skin was burned in the shape of a handprint, but inside the burn, the flesh was raised, forming letters. Lease signed. "What do we do?" I asked the kid, my voice breaking. Toby looked up at me. He smiled, and I saw that his teeth were turning into needles. "We wait," he said. "We wait for the next tenant." The flashlight flickered. Once, twice, and then the darkness took us. I slapped the flashlight against my palm, hard. Once, twice, 3 times. The beam sputtered, flared, a sickly yellow that barely illuminated my own boots, and then died completely. The darkness that followed wasn't natural. It wasn't just the absence of light. It was a physical weight. A velvet shroud dropped over my head. It pressed against my eardrums. It tasted of copper and stale, recycled air. "Don't move," I hissed, though I didn't know if I was talking to the kid or myself. My heart was slamming against my ribs like a trapped bird. "Calm down, Vance. You're in a crawl space. It's tight, it's dark, but it's just physics. wood and dirt. But physics didn't explain the floor. I could feel it shifting beneath me. The millions of dead flies. Toby had mentioned they weren't entirely dead. The carpet of insect husks was undulating, a slow, tidal breathing. Every time I shifted my weight, I heard the dry crackle snap of exoskeletons breaking, a sound like walking on eggshells and dried leaves. It's checking the balance. Toby's voice came from the dark, to my left. He sounded too calm now. The hysteria had bled out, replaced by a hollow, drugged monotony, calculating the liquidity. "Stop talking like that," I snapped. I reached for my belt, fumbling for my backup piece, an ankle holster I kept for deep cover. My fingers brushed the leather. The gun was there. A snub-nose 38? Not much against a demon, but it made me feel slightly less naked. "We're getting out of here. If there's no exit up, there's an exit out. Foundations have vents, drainage pipes." "You don't get it, Detective," Toby whispered. "We aren't under the house anymore. We're in the ledger." I ignored him and started crawling. I moved blind, one hand sweeping the darkness in front of me, the other gripping the 38. "Ow," I grunted as my hand struck something hard. I felt it. It wasn't a cinder block wall. It was smooth, cold, and metallic. I ran my fingers up. A filing cabinet? Down here? I kept feeling along the object. It was rusted, the metal flaking off under my touch, but the shape was unmistakable. A standard issue, 4-drawer vertical file cabinet, the kind you see in every precinct bullpen from here to Chicago. I pulled on the handle of the top drawer. It slid open with a screech of metal on metal that sounded like a woman screaming. The smell hit me instantly, must and rot. I plunged my hand inside, expecting paper files. My fingers brushed something wet, slick skin. I jerked my hand back, wiping it frantically on my pants. "What the hell?" "Archives," Toby said. I could hear him shuffling behind me, the crunch of the fly floor getting closer. "It keeps everything, every lie, every stolen dollar. It gives them form." I needed light. I needed to see what I had just touched. I grabbed the flashlight again, unscrewed the tail cap in the dark, rubbed the batteries against my shirt, an old trick to get a little more juice out of alkaline, jammed them back in. I clicked the button. A beam of light, weak and flickering, cut the dark. I almost dropped the light again. We weren't in a crawl space. The space had expanded. The dirt floor stretched out into a tunnel that seemed to go on forever, the ceiling vanishing into gloom, but it wasn't empty. We were standing in a graveyard of office furniture, and dozens of filing cabinets stood in erratic rows, some overturned, some sinking into the sea of dead flies. There were desks, heavy oak executive desks rotting from the legs up, chairs with shredded upholstery, and everywhere, scattered like confetti, were papers, bank statements, eviction notices, loan applications. I swung the light to the open filing cabinet I had touched. Inside the drawer, packed tight, were slabs of meat. They looked like tongues. Human tongues, pressed flat, filed in neat rows. Each one had a tag stapled directly into the flesh. I leaned in, bile rising in my throat, to read the tag on the first slab. Claim denid. Fa tol itusene onihundra auto halfems. It feeds on the transaction, I muttered, realizing the logic of the insanity. Mara said it feeds on lies. And desperation, Toby added. He stepped into the halo of my light. I flinched. The kid looked worse than before. The mud on his face was hardening into a shell. His jaw hung slightly askew, and when he blinked, his eyelids seemed to stick, making a wet, tacky sound. He was holding a stack of papers he'd picked up from the floor. "Look," he said, holding one out. It was a foreclosure notice, but the address listed wasn't Harrow Lane. It was my address, my apartment. This is dated next month, I said, my voice trembling. It moves fast when it wears a new suit, Toby said. He pointed a trembling, dirt-stained finger down the tunnel. The manager is that way. I heard the printer. The mechanical whirring sound started up again. Click whir! Click whir! I gripped the 38 tight. Stay behind me. We moved through the aisle of rotting desks. The air grew colder, heavy with that ozone scent. The floor became treacherous. In places, the sea of flies gave way to patches of that black, bubbling liquid I'd seen upstairs. I had to hop from a sinking desk chair to a pile of waterlogged tax returns to avoid stepping in it. Silas, Toby whispered. Your hand. I looked at my left wrist, where Mara, or the thing wearing her, had grabbed me. The burn was glowing. A faint, bioluminescent green, like the backlight of an old watch. The words Lee's signed stood out against my skin, pulsing in time with the distant whirring. It's marking time, I said. My time. Depreciation, Toby corrected. We rounded a corner formed by a stack of molding cardboard boxes labeled Bad Deb Tea. The tunnel opened up into a cavern. The ceiling here was visible. It was the underside of the floorboards of the house above, but they were translucent, like frosted glass. Through them, I could see blurry shapes moving, shadows. The cops. Miller and Kowalski. They were walking around up there. I could see the blue wash of their strobe lights pulsing through the wood. And standing in the center of the room above us, visible only as a dense, dark shape, was me. The entity I watched, paralyzed, as the shape of Silas Vance walked over to the shape of Miller. Hey! I screamed, cupping my hands around my mouth. Miller! It's not me! Look down! I'm down here! I fired the 38 into the ceiling. Bang! The wood splintered, but the bullet didn't pass through. It flattened against the underside of the floorboards like it had hit a steel plate, then fell back down, landing in the flies at my feet. Upstairs, the figures didn't even pause. The sound hadn't traveled. We were soundproofed, buried. They can't hear. The assets. A voice rumbled. It wasn't Toby. I spun around, leveling the gun. In the center of the cavern, sitting on a dais made of crushed computer towers and servers, was the recliner. It was hideous. The leather had expanded, grown pores. It breathed. Veins pulsed beneath the dark upholstery, and sitting in it wasn't a person. It was a conglomeration, a torso made of shredded money, bound together with black slime, arms made of copper wiring and bone, and a head, or what served as a head, was an old, bulky CRT monitor, cracked and leaking fluid, fused onto the neck. The screen glowed green. A face was rendered on the screen in ASCII characters, text symbols forming a crude, pixelated skull. Detective Vance. The monitor buzzed. The voice was synthesized, choppy, composed of clips from wiretaps and recorded emergency calls. You are out of jurisdiction. What are you? I demanded, aiming for the screen. I am the compound interest, the thing rasped. I am the cost of living. The copper wire arm raised. It held a stamp, a heavy, old-fashioned rubber stamp. You have a debt, the machine voice said. Gambling, alcohol, alimony. You owe. You have always owed. I don't owe you a damn thing, I spat. Correction. It whirred. We bought your debt. We consolidated it. Now we collect. The floor around us erupted. The flies swarmed up, a black tornado, from the piles of debris. Hands shot out gray, withered hands, like Mara's. They grabbed my ankles. Toby, run! I yelled, kicking at a hand that was trying to claw through my boot. But Toby wasn't running. He was walking toward the recliner. Toby, the kid walked with a strange, lurching gait. He stopped at the foot of the dais. He looked back at me, his eyes now completely black, leaking that same dark fluid. "I can't afford the late fees, Silas," he said softly. "I have to refinance." He turned back to the entity. He fell to his knees. The entity leaned forward. The CRT monitor head tilted. A panel in the chest made of money, slid open. It looked like the slot of a vending machine or a shredder. Deposit. Accepted. The voice buzzed. No. I lunged forward, fighting through the grasping hands. Toby climbed onto the dais. He didn't scream. He simply leaned into the opening in the creature's chest. The machine grabbed him. The copper wires wrapped around him, pulling him in. There was a terrible, wet grinding sound, like a garbage disposal chewing on meat. Shredded clothing and red mist sprayed out of the back of the chair. Clickware. Clickware. A slip of paper ejected from a slot in the recliner's armrest. The entity seemed to grow larger. The screen flickered, the ASCII skull becoming higher resolution, more defined. It looked a little more like Toby now. The hands holding my legs tightened. I couldn't move. I was anchored. The entity turned the monitor head toward me. "Processing," it said. "Balance updated. Asset, Toby liquidated. Value added to Mara and Elliot Trust." It raised the rubber stamp again. "Next transaction, Silas Vance. Audit in progress." The CRT screen flashed images. Fast. Too fast. My ex-wife crying at the kitchen table. Me at the track, watching a horse named Lucky Break falter at the finish line. Me taking a bribe from a dealer in 2008 to look the other way. Me burying the evidence of a rookie's mistake. "Guilty," the voice judged. "High yield potential." I fired. I emptied the gun. 5 shots. Bam, 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 bam. 2 bullets hit the monitor. Glass shattered. Sparks showered down. The screen cracked, the image distorting into jagged lines of green static. The entity roared a sound of dial-up static amplified to a deafening scream. The wire arms lashed out. One caught me across the chest, throwing me backward. I flew through the air, crashing into a stack of filing cabinets. The wind was knocked out of me. I lay there, gasping, tasting blood. The flashlight had rolled away, beam spinning crazily across the cavern. I tried to sit up, but my ribs screamed in protest. "You cannot cancel the contract." The entity stuttered, the voice glitching. It began to stand. The chair itself uncoiled, legs extending, transforming into a spider-like construct of metal and leather. It skittered down from the dais, moving toward me. I scrambled backward, pushing myself with my heels. My hand hit something sharp on the floor. I looked down. It was the iron ring I had snapped off the trapdoor in the kitchen. It must have fallen through the floor with me. A jagged piece of rusted iron, sharp as a shiv. I grabbed it. "I'm not a contract," I gritted out, forcing myself to stand, though my legs felt like jelly. "And I'm not a deposit." The entity towered over me. The broken screen flickered. "You are inventory." It lunged. I didn't try to dodge. I stepped into the reach, ducking under the copper claw. I jammed the jagged iron spike upward, aiming not for the screen, but for the soft, pulsing mass of shredded money and black slime in its torso, the mechanism that had eaten Toby. I drove the metal in, deep. The entity shrieked. It wasn't a mechanical sound this time. It was a human scream. My scream. It was using my voice to scream in pain. Black bile erupted from the wound, spraying over me. It burned like acid. The creature staggered back, the spider legs flailing, smashing filing cabinets. Zistame error. The cavern shook. The translucent ceiling above began to crack. I saw my chance. Behind the dais, where the recliner had been sitting, there was a vertical pipe, a sewage stack, old cast iron, running up into the darkness. It was cracked, leaking filth, but it went up. I ran. "Seize him," the entity garbled. The floor ripples became waves. The dead flies rose up in a choking cloud. I jumped for the pipe. I grabbed the cold, slimy metal and pulled. My shoulder popped, screaming in agony, but I held on. I shimmied up, boots scraping for purchase on the rivet heads. Below me, the entity was reforming. The hole in its chest was knitting shut with fresh currency. It looked up at me, the broken monitor glowing red. "Interest accumulates," it whispered. I didn't look back. I climbed. The pipe passed through the layer of translucent floorboards. As my head broke the plane, the world shifted. Color returned. The smell of ozone vanished, replaced by the smell of dust and old coffee. I gasped, pulling myself up through a hole in the drywall. I fell onto a floor. A real floor. Cheap linoleum. I was in the bathroom. My bathroom. My apartment. I lay there, chest heaving, staring at the ceiling fan. How? I wheezed. How did I get here? I scrambled up, stumbling into the living room. It was my apartment, but it was wrong. The furniture was pushed against the walls. The center of the room was empty, except for one thing. Sitting in the middle of my rug was a brand new recliner. Black leather, price tag still dangling from the armrest. And sitting in the recliner was a man. He was wearing my bathrobe. He was holding my coffee mug. He turned to look at me. It was me, Silas Vance. Clean-shaven, rested, eyes bright and alive. The thing that was Silas smiled. It was a perfect smile. The kind of smile I hadn't been able to make in 10 years. "You're late," the double said. His voice was smooth, confident. I was just about to head to the Manning precinct. We cracked the graph case. Hero Cop saves the day. I stood there, covered in mud, fly guts, and black slime, holding a rusted piece of iron. I looked like a monster. He looked like the hero. "You're not me," I rasped. "I'm the solvent version of you," he said, taking a sip of coffee. "I'm the version that doesn't drink. The version that paid off the bookies. The version your daughter will actually speak to." He set the mug down. "And you?" He gestured at me with pity. "You're just the bad debt, and we always write off the bad debt." He reached under the cushion of the recliner and pulled out my service weapon, the Glock 17 I thought I had lost in the house. He leveled it at my chest. "Any last words before we close the account?" I tightened my grip on the rusted iron spike. The burn on my wrist throbbed hot and searing. "Yeah," I said, eyeing the distance between us. "Check the fine print." I threw the spike. The rusted iron spike turned end over end in the air, a blur of tetanus orange against the sterile white of the apartment walls. It didn't hit him in the chest. It slammed into his right shoulder, the heavy, jagged point punching through the expensive bathrobe and pinning him to the backrest of the leather recliner. The double didn't scream. He didn't even drop the coffee mug. He just looked at the metal protruding from his shoulder with mild annoyance, as if I'd spilled wine on a new carpet. "Assault," the double stated, his voice devoid of pain but rich with bureaucratic disappointment. "That's a felony, Silas. That's going to hurt your credit score." He raised the Glock. I dove behind the kitchen island just as the gun went off. Crack. The bullet blew a chunk of granite out of the countertop inches from my face. Dust and stone fragments sprayed into my eyes. "You can't kill me," I yelled, scrambling over the slick linoleum, trying to keep the island between us. "You're just a printout. You're a damn ghost in a machine." "I am the standard," the double replied calmly. I heard the leather creak. He was standing up. He was coming. "I am the version of you that remembers anniversaries," he continued, his footsteps heavy, deliberate. Clack, clack, hard-soled dress shoes on tile. "I am the version that didn't take the bribe from the Ruiz cartel. I am the version your captain is proud of." I grabbed a heavy cast-iron skillet from the drying rack. It felt pitifully small. "You're a lie!" I screamed. "I am a consolidation," he corrected. He was close now. I could hear the wet, tearing sound of the spike being pulled out of his shoulder. "And you are the redundant asset." He rounded the corner of the island. He looked perfect. Even with a hole in his shoulder, he looked impeccable. The wound wasn't bleeding blood. It was leaking a thick, black substance that smelled like toner ink and rot. It dripped onto the floor, sizzling where it touched the tile. He raised the gun again. I didn't wait. I swung the skillet with every ounce of desperate, terrified strength I had left. It connected with his outstretched hand, the cast iron crunching against his wrist. The Glock skittered across the floor, sliding under the refrigerator. The double frowned. The impact should have shattered bone. Instead, his wrist bent at an impossible 90-degree angle, like a rubber hose. "Processing error," he muttered. I tackled him. We hit the floor hard. He was heavy unnaturally so. It was like wrestling a mannequin filled with mercury. He was cold to the touch, his skin possessing the smooth, frictionless texture of cured plastic. He got a hand around my throat. His grip was a vice. "We do not accept returns," he choked out. The smooth, confident voice was beginning to glitch, skipping like a scratched CD. "Your ACK account has been closed." My vision started to swim. Black spots danced in front of my eyes. The smell coming off him was overpowering ozone, formaldehyde, and the sickly sweet scent of dryer sheets masking decay. I clawed at his face. My fingernails dug into his cheek. The skin didn't bruise. It tore. It ripped like wet paper. Beneath the layer of handsome, clean-shaven skin, there was no muscle. There was no bone. There was gray, fibrous matter, compressed dust, and weaving through it, twitching like worms, were strips of ticker tape. Denied. Overdue. Insufficient funds. Final notice. The horror of it gave me a surge of adrenaline. I bucked my hips, throwing his weight off me just enough to break his grip. I sucked in a ragged breath of air and slammed my forehead into his nose. His face collapsed inward. It wasn't a crunch of cartilage. It was the sound of a hollow plastic shell caving in, the bridge of his nose inverted. The eyes, those perfect bright eyes, pepped loose from their sockets, dangling by thin copper wires. System failure. The double gargled, the voice now sounding like the entity in the crawlspace. Asset. Depreciation. Critical. I rolled away, scrambling on hands and knees toward the refrigerator, toward the gun. "Come back." The thing on the floor shrieked. It was trying to stand, but its coordination was gone. It flopped like a fish. Black ink sprang from its ruined face. "We can, refinance? We can offer lower rates?" I grabbed the Glock. The grip was cold, familiar. It was real. I spun onto my back, leveling the weapon. The double had risen to its knees. Its jaw hung loose, unhinged. From the cavern of its throat, the sound of a dial-up modem screamed a high-pitched electronic screech that drilled into my teeth. It lunged at me, arms outstretched, fingers lengthening into those familiar gray claws. I pulled the trigger. Bang, center mass. Bang, center mass. Bang, headshot. The bullets hit with wet thuds. The impact knocked the thing backward. It slammed against the cabinets and slid down, leaving a broad smear of black slime. It twitched once, twice. Then, it began to dissolve. It didn't rot. It simply lost cohesion. The skin flaked away into gray ash. The clothes turned to moth-eaten rags in seconds. The black slime evaporated into a foul-smelling mist. Within moments, there was nothing left on my kitchen floor but a pile of dust, a few rusted staples, and the iron spike I'd thrown. The apartment fell silent. The recliner in the living room sat empty. I lowered the gun, my chest heaving. I wiped the slime from my face. I was shaking so hard, the gun rattled in my grip. "It's over," I whispered. "It's done." I stood up, my legs trembling. I needed to wash this filth off me. I needed to call Miller. I needed to see my daughter. I walked into the bathroom. I turned on the tap. The water ran clear, thank God. I splashed water on my face, scrubbing at the mud and the dried blood and the black residue of the thing that had worn my face. I grabbed a towel and dried off. Then I looked in the mirror. I froze. The reflection staring back at me was Silas Vance. Bruised, battered, eyes haunted but me. But behind me, in the reflection of the open bathroom door, the hallway was dark. And in the darkness of the mirror hallway, standing just behind my reflection, was a tall, shadowy figure in a robe. I spun around. The hallway was empty. I looked back at the mirror. The figure was closer now, right over my shoulder. It wasn't wearing a robe. It was wearing a suit. A nice suit. It leaned in its face, obscured by static, and whispered. The sound didn't come from the room. It came from inside my own head, vibrating against the base of my skull. "The debt is not forgiven, Silas. It is merely transferred." A sudden, sharp pain flared in my chest. Not my wrist, my chest. I ripped my shirt open. There, directly over my heart, the skin was raised in angry red. It wasn't a burn this time. It was a scar. A brand. It was a barcode below the black lines. Tiny numbers were seared into my flesh. I set 002. The lights in the bathroom flickered. From the living room, the TV turned on. I walked slowly out of the bathroom. My apartment felt different now. The air was too still. The shadows in the corners seemed to stretch toward me, sticky and eager. On the TV screen, the news was playing. "Police are baffled by the scene discovered at the Graff residence this evening," the reporter was saying. She stood in front of the familiar decaying house on Harrow Lane. "Authorities found the body of Elliot Graff, deceased for some time. But in a shocking turn, they also discovered 2 other bodies in the crawlspace beneath the home." My blood turned to ice. "One has been identified as Tobias Miller," the reporter continued. "The second body has been tentatively identified as Detective Silas Vance, a veteran of the force who went missing earlier today." The screen flashed a photo. It was a photo of a body being zipped into a bag. A hand hung out, limp and pale. On the wrist was a watch, my watch, and a burn mark that said, "Lee signed." I looked down at my own wrist. The burn was gone. The skin was smooth. "No," I whispered, backing away from the TV. "No, I'm here. I'm right here." The reporter's voice changed. It deepened, distorting into that dry, papery whisper. "You are the solvent version, Silas. You are the settlement." I looked at the recliner. It was facing the TV, and sitting in it was me. The messy me. The dead me. The one covered in mud and fly guts. It was slumped in the chair, head lolled back, eyes open and glassy, staring at the ceiling. A bullet hole in the center of his forehead. I looked at the gun in my hand. It was smoking. I looked at my clothes. They were clean. I was wearing the bathrobe, the expensive one. The memories slammed into place like a steel trap shutting. I hadn't escaped the crawl space. I had died there. The thing that climbed out. The thing that killed the monster in the kitchen. I was the monster. I was the consolidation. I was the version that worked. The corpse in the chair, the real Silas Vance, slowly raised a hand. It pointed a dead, stiff finger at me. Its lips didn't move, but the voice came from the TV, from the walls, from the very air of the apartment. "Rent is due on the 1st. The doorbell rang. Ding dong. It was a cheerful, normal sound. I looked at the door. I looked at the dead body of myself In the chair, I felt a sudden, overpowering urge to clean, to tidy up, to hide the mess. Yes, I heard myself say. My voice was smooth, perfect, coming. I walked to the recliner. I grabbed the ankles of my corpse. I didn't feel horror. I didn't feel grief. I felt efficient. I dragged the body toward the closet. It was heavy, but I was strong. I was solvent. The doorbell rang again. "Just a minute," I called out cheerfully. I shoved the body in amongst the coats and closed the door. I adjusted my bathrobe. I smoothed my hair. I walked to the front door and opened it. Standing there were two uniformed officers, Miller and Kowalski. They looked concerned. "Detective?" Miller asked, peering past me into the dim apartment. "We heard shots. Neighbors called it in. Is everything okay?" I smiled. It was a perfect smile. The kind of smile Silas Vance hadn't been able to make in 10 years. "Everything is fine, fellas," I said. "Just watching a movie. A little loud. Sorry about that." Miller relaxed. "Jesus, Silas, you scared us. We heard about the Graff house. We thought you were." "I'm fine," I said. "Actually, I've never been better. I think I'm finally turning a corner." Kowalski sniffed the air. He frowned. "What's that smell? Smells like old meat?" I blocked the doorway, my smile never wavering. "Just took out the trash," I said. "Leftovers. You know how it is." "Right," Miller said, though he still looked uneasy. "Well, take it easy, Silas. See you at the precinct tomorrow?" "You can bank on it," I said. I closed the door. I locked the deadbolt. I slid the chain in place. I turned back to the silent apartment. The closet door creaked open a fraction of an inch. A single fat fly buzzed out, circling lazily in the stagnant air. I walked over to the new leather recliner in the center of the rug. I sat down. It was comfortable. It molded to my shape perfectly, like a second skin. I picked up the remote. I turned up the volume on the static. I closed my eyes. The static on the TV screen didn't just hiss. It breathed. A rhythmic, oscillating wave of white noise that matched the slow, deliberate thrumming of the new heart in my chest. I sat there for a long time. Time was different now. It was no longer a sequence of moments to be experienced, but a resource to be budgeted. I calculated the depreciation of the daylight outside the drawn blinds. I audited the silence of the apartment building. The end. The screen had flashed in my mind. A closing statement. But accounts are rarely closed so easily. There are always trailing interests, administrative fees, residual balances. My eyes snapped open. The fly that had buzzed out of the closet landed on the bridge of my nose. I didn't swat it. I didn't feel the tickle of its legs. I simply noted its presence as a minor biological deduction. I stood up. The movement was fluid, hydraulic. The aches in my lower back, the stiffness in the knees that had plagued the old Silas, the insolvent Silas, were gone. I walked to the mirror in the hallway, adjusting the lapels of my robe. "Asset management," I said to the reflection. The voice was mine, but better, deeper, resonant with authority. The reflection smiled back. It was a winning smile. I needed to go to the precinct. I needed to file the paperwork. The death of Detective Silas Vance needed to be formalized so that the life of Detective Silas Vance could begin its amortization period. But first, there was the matter of the closet. I opened the door. The smell hit me not as a wave of nausea, but as a rich, complex data stream. Decomposition, uric acid, the metallic tang of copper-coated lead. The corpse of the man I used to be was jammed between a winter parka and a box of old vacuum cleaner parts. He looked so small, so messy, a bad investment of biological material. I crouched down. The skin of the corpse was gray and slack. I placed my hand on its chest. "Consolidate," I whispered. The flesh beneath my hand began to ripple. It softened, losing its structural integrity, melting like wax under a heat lamp. The clothes dissolved into lint. The bones crunched softly,
turning to powder. In moments, the body was gone, reduced to a thick, dark stain on the carpet that looked like spilled motor oil. I stood up and closed the door. A cleaning fee would be deducted later. I went to the bedroom and dressed. A crisp white shirt, a navy tie. The suit fit perfectly, though I had gained no weight. It was simply that my posture was now structurally optimal. I holstered the Glock, the one that had killed the previous tenant of this life, and checked the magazine. Full. I picked up my badge. It felt warm. As I walked to the door, my phone buzzed. It was Miller. "Silas, you there? Cap wants a debrief on the Graff house. The press is swarming." I brought the phone to my ear. "I'm on my way, Miller. Have the paperwork ready." "You sound different," Miller said. "Less gravel. You quit smoking overnight?" "I quit everything," I said. "I'm a new man." The precinct was a chaotic ecosystem of ringing phones, shouting perps, and the clatter of keyboards. I walked through the bullpen, and for the first time in 20 years, I didn't feel the weight of the place. I didn't feel the crushing pressure of the city's sin. I felt only the flow of transactions, crime, punishment, plea deals. It was all just math. Miller was at his desk, nursing a lukewarm coffee, looking pale. He looked up as I approached, his eyes widening slightly. "Jesus, Silas," he breathed. "You look like you slept for a week. Did you get a facial or something?" "Clean living," I said, pulling a chair over. I sat with a straight spine, hands folded on the desk. "Let's close the Graff file." Miller slid a folder across the desk. "It's a mess. The coroner pulled 2 bodies out of that crawl space. Toby and, well, the John Doe, the one with your badge." He watched me carefully. "Forensics is confused. The John Doe. The dental records match you, Silas. Fingerprints, too. What was left of them?" I didn't blink. "Clerical error," I said smoothly. "Identity theft is a rising statistic. The man in the crawl space was a grifter. He stole my spare piece, my backup badge, tried to assume my identity to dodge a debt." Miller frowned, tapping a pen against his lip. "That's a hell of a coincidence. And the body? It was decomposed, Silas, like it had been down there for weeks. But you were here yesterday. Time of death is notoriously difficult to pin down in anaerobic environments," I said. My voice carried a subtle subsonic frequency, a lullaby of bureaucracy. Damp earth, fungal acceleration, it messes with the timeline. Miller's eyes glazed over slightly. He nodded slowly. Yeah, I guess that makes sense. Fungal acceleration." "Exactly," I said. "And the other body? Elliot Graff?" "Still in the recliner," Miller said, shaking his head. "Dead for months. But here's the kicker. We found traces of recent care. Someone was feeding him, changing him, keeping him fresh." "Mara," I said. The name tasted like a coin on my tongue. Miller flipped a page. "Mara Graff, the daughter. We have an APB out, but she's in the wind. Neighbors saw her leave with a duffel bag about an hour before we got there. If she was keeping the old man for the checks..." "She's a liability," I interrupted. "She committed fraud. She desecrated a corpse. She owes the state." "We'll find her," Miller said. "She can't have gone far. No car, no credit cards." "No," I said, standing up. "She has cash. She cashed the last pension check yesterday morning. She has resources." I walked to the whiteboard where the timeline of the crime was sketched out in red marker. I picked up a black marker. I drew a circle around Mara's name. "I'll find her, Miller. It's personal. She tried to kill me." Miller blinked, the fog clearing from his eyes for a second. "She did? When?" "In the house," I lied. The lie came as easily as breathing. She trapped me in the crawl space. She wanted to feed me to the house. I barely got out. I turned to look at him. I let the mask slip, just a fraction of a millimeter. I let the hunger show in my eyes. She has a debt to pay. Chapter 14, The Withdrawal. Mara. The motel room smelled of stale cigarettes and lemon polish, a scent that tried and failed to mask the underlying odor of despair. It was the kind of place where people came to hide or to die, or to count out their last few dollars on a stained bedspread. I was doing the latter. $3,400. That was it. That was the sum total of my father's life, of my brother's life, of my own soul. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the TV bolted to the wall. The volume was low, a murmur of voices. Miraculous survival of Detective Silas Vance.
I squeezed my eyes shut. I had seen him go in. I had seen the darkness of the house swallow him. I had heard the gunshots, 5 of them, rapid fire, and then the scream. It wasn't a scream of victory. It was the sound of a man being torn apart. And then silence. I had run. I had left Toby. God forgive me. I had left my brother in the floorboards because the house had wanted him more than it wanted me. It had taken him as collateral. But now, the news said Vance was alive. I opened my eyes and looked at the screen. The reporter was standing on the steps of the precinct. The doors opened, and a man walked out. It was Vance. He looked impeccable. His suit was sharp. His hair was combed. He walked with a terrifying, mechanical grace, ignoring the microphones thrust in his face. He stopped at the bottom of the stairs and looked directly into the camera. The feed didn't glitch. The image was crystal clear. But I saw his eyes. They weren't looking at the reporters. They were looking through the lens, through the broadcast signal, through the miles of fiber optic cable and satellite relays. They were looking at me. On the screen, Vance smiled. It wasn't a human smile. It was too symmetrical, too wide. "We are closing all outstanding accounts," he said. The audio on the TV distorted. His voice dropped an octave, vibrating the plastic casing of the television set. "Interest accrue daily, Mara." I scrambled backward on the bed, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I grabbed the remote and jammed my thumb on the power button. The screen went black. Then, a single green line of text appeared in the center of the darkness. "Payment due." I yanked the power cord from the wall. The text remained for a second, burning in the afterimage, before fading. "He's not real," I whispered, clutching the wad of cash to my chest. "He's not real. It got him. It's wearing him." I had to move. The money was the tracker. I looked down at the bills in my hand. Benjamin Franklin stared back at me with a judgmental smirk. The presence feeds on lies, and the money derived from the dead. That's what I had realized in the house. The money was infected. Every dollar I had taken from my father's pension after he died was a link in the chain, and I was holding the chain. My hands started to shake. I needed to get rid of it. I needed to burn it. But if I burned it, I couldn't run. I couldn't buy a bus ticket. I couldn't eat. It was the perfect trap. To survive, I had to keep spending. To keep spending was to summon him. Knock. 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 The sound came from the motel door. 3 precise, heavy raps. I froze. "Housekeeping," a muffled voice called out. It didn't sound like a maid. It sounded like static trying to imitate a human voice. I stood up slowly, backing toward the bathroom window. I was on the ground floor. If I could get the window open... "Miss Graff?" the voice called again. "We have a package for you." I grabbed my bag. I didn't look at the door. I ran into the cramped bathroom and locked the door behind me. I climbed into the bathtub and wrestled with the frosted glass window. It was painted shut. From the main room, I heard the electronic beep of a key card sliding into the lock. Beep. Green light. The lock clicked. The door handle turned slowly. Mara. The voice was inside the room now. It was Silas Vance's voice, smooth and terrible. "I'm here to audit your returns." I slammed the heel of my hand against the window frame. Crack. The paint gave way. I shoved the window up. Cool night air rushed in. I scrambled through the opening, tumbling out onto the concrete walkway behind the motel. I hit the ground hard, scraping my palms, but I didn't stop. I scrambled to my feet and ran. I ran toward the highway, toward the lights of the passing semi-trucks. Behind me, from the open window of room 104, a shadow stretched out. It elongated across the parking lot, moving faster than the light source should allow. I didn't look back. I sprinted across the drainage ditch and up the embankment to the interstate. A truck was coming. I waved my arms frantically. The air brakes hissed a sound like a serpent, and the massive rig slowed down, pulling onto the shoulder. I yanked the passenger door open and climbed up, breathless. The driver was a heavy-set man with a beard, wearing a trucker hat that shadowed his eyes. He looked at me, surprised. "Whoa there, lady. You in trouble?" "Just drive," I gasped, slouching down in the seat. "Please, just drive. I have money." I pulled out a $100 bill, one of Elliot's pension bills, and shoved it at him. The driver looked at the money. Then he looked at me. He grinned. "Sure thing, darling." He put the truck in gear. The engine roared. We merged back onto the highway. I watched the motel recede in the side mirror. Standing under the flickering neon sign of the vacancy light was a man in a suit. He wasn't running. He was just watching. He raised a hand and pointed a finger at the truck. I slumped back in the seat, closing my eyes. Safe. For now. "Where are we headed?" the driver asked. "Anywhere," I said. "West. Just far away." "West is good," the driver said. "West is expansive. Lots of open road." He reached for the radio. "Mind if I put on some tunes?" "Helps. Pass the time." "Sure," I whispered. He turned the dial. Static hissed. "Breaking news," the radio voice crackled. I stiffened. "Police are expanding the manhunt for Mara Graff." "Turn it off," I said. The driver didn't move his hand. "She is considered armed and dangerous," the radio continued. The voice began to warp. "She is currently in possession of stolen assets." I looked at the driver. He was staring straight ahead at the road, but his head was tilted at an unnatural angle. "Sir?" I asked, my voice trembling. The driver slowly turned his head to look at me. His eyes were gone. In their place were $2 silver, shoved deep into the sockets. "Did you check the exchange rate?" the driver asked. His voice was no longer his own. It was the synthesized, choppy voice of the recliner. The doors locked with a heavy thud. The truck began to accelerate. "No!" I screamed, grabbing the door handle. It wouldn't budge. "The transaction," the driver thing said, the silver coins glinting in the dashboard lights, "has been processed." The truck swerved, not toward an exit, toward the concrete abutment of an overpass. I screamed as the world rushed toward us. Chapter 15. The Settlement. I woke up to the smell of antiseptic and the beep of a monitor. Beep, beep, beep. My head throbbed with a dull, heavy pressure. I tried to move my arms, but I couldn't. I opened my eyes. I was in a hospital room, or something that looked like a hospital room. The walls were white, but the paint was peeling in strips that looked like dried skin. The light overhead was a fluorescent tube that flickered with a greenish hue. I looked down. My wrists were bound to the rails of the bed, not with leather straps, not with handcuffs, with duct tape. Silver, heavy-duty duct tape. Panic, cold and sharp, flooded my veins. I thrashed against the restraints. "Help! Somebody help me! Please, keep your voice down," a soothing voice said. "This is a place of healing and reconciliation." I froze. Sitting in the corner of the room, in the shadows, was a recliner. It wasn't a hospital chair, it was the recliner. The brown leather was cracked, stained with dark grease, and sitting in it was Silas Vance. He had his legs crossed. He was reading a clipboard. "You're awake," he said, not looking up. "Good. We need your signature on the final release forms." "Where am I?" I croaked. "The truck. The driver." "Written off," Silas said casually. "A total loss. But you're resilient, Mara. You have equity." He stood up and walked to the side of the bed. He looked down at me with those terrible, perfect eyes. "You tried to run," he said softly, "but you can't run from yourself. You took the money. You spent the money. You became part of the economy." He held up the clipboard. It wasn't a medical chart. It was a bank statement. My father's bank statement. The balance was 0. "You're overdrawn," Silas said, "but we have a program for that. A debt forgiveness plan." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a roll of duct tape. "No," I whimpered. "Please, I'll pay it back. I'll work. I'll do anything." "You will work," Silas agreed. "You're going to be very busy." He leaned in close. I could smell him now. Under the cologne, under the soap, the smell of the crawl space. The smell of wet earth and rot. "The position of Elliot has been vacated," he whispered. "We need a new principal. Someone to sit in the chair. Someone to hold the debt." He ripped a strip of tape from the roll. "Screech. It's a lifetime appointment, Mara." I opened my mouth to scream, but the tape was faster. He smoothed it over my lips, sealing the sound inside. He smiled. "Welcome to the family business." He moved to the IV stand next to the bed. The bag hanging there wasn't filled with saline. It was filled with a thick, black, fluid ink. He connected the line to the needle in my arm. I watched the black liquid flow down the tube. I felt it hit my vein, ice cold, burning like acid. My vision began to blur. The white walls of the room started to bleed text. Numbers, calculations. Mara graph, asset by 003, initializing. Silas patted my hand. "Don't worry," he said, walking back to the Reckel, inner and sitting down. He picked up the remote and pointed it at the blank wall. "The first 100 years are the hardest." He clicked the remote. The wall turned into a screen. It showed a young couple standing on the porch of the Graff house. A for sale sign stood in the yard. "Look," Silas said, his voice filled with pride. "New tenants. Fresh capital." I tried to close my eyes, but I found I couldn't. The muscles wouldn't obey. I could only watch. The black ink reached my heart. And for the first time in months, I stopped worrying about money. I was the money. The black fluid didn't just fill my veins, it rewrote them. It was heavier than blood, sluggish and cold, carrying a weight that pressed me down into the mattress. But the mattress was gone. The sterile white room flickered a bad refresh rate on an old monitor, and when the image stabilized, I was no longer in a hospital bed. I was back in the living room. The living room, the air was thick with the scent of mildew and stale lavender, the same cloying perfume I had used to mask Elliot's rot. But now, underneath it, was the sharp chemical smell of new carpeting and fresh paint. A renovation, a flip. I was seated in the recliner. The leather was warm, sticky against the back of my neck. Silas stood before me. He had shed the suit jacket, rolling up the sleeves of his white shirt to reveal forearms that were too smooth, like molded plastic. He held a curved needle in one hand and a spool of thick black thread in the other. "The sensory input is distracting," Silas said. His voice didn't echo in the room. It originated directly inside my skull, bypassing my ears entirely. To maintain the illusion of occupancy, the principle must be internal. He leaned in. I tried to pull away, But my body was no longer my own. The ink had calcified in my joints. I was a statue made of meat and debt. I couldn't twitch a finger. I couldn't blink. "Don't worry," he whispered, the smell of wet earth wafting from his mouth. "You won't need to see where we're going." He touched the tip of the needle to my left eyelid. I wanted to scream. I wanted to beg, but my jaw was clamped shut, fused by an invisible force that felt like the weight of 1,000 unpaid bills. Pierce. The pain was sharp, immediate, and then distant. It was a transaction fee, a necessary deduction. I felt the thread slide through the skin, a dry, rasping sensation. Stitch, pull, stitch, pull. Darkness descended over my left eye, then the right. He worked with the efficiency of a coroner and the care of an accountant. With every loop of the thread, the world outside faded. The peeling wallpaper, the dust motes, the water stain on the ceiling, they were all redacted. "There?" Silas said, his voice sounding pleased. "Secure assets." I sat in the dark, but it wasn't empty. The darkness was alive with information. I could feel the house. I could feel the wiring in the walls, like a nervous system buzzing with 60-cycle fear. I felt the drip of the faucet in the kitchen, a rhythmic counting of pennies. I felt the foundation settling into the mud, groaning under the interest of gravity. And I felt them, the couple from the screen, David and Sarah. I didn't see them, but I knew them. I knew their combined income. I knew David was hiding a gambling loss from 3 years ago. I knew Sarah was pregnant and hadn't told him yet because she was worried about the cost of childcare. I knew they were desperate. I knew they were perfect. "They're here," Silas whispered. I felt his hand on my shoulder, heavy and proprietary. "Showtime, Mara. Remember the script." The front door opened. "Hello?" A woman's voice. "Sarah." It trembled slightly. "Mr. Vance?" The agency said the door would be open. Footsteps on the hardwood. Hesitant. Hopeful. "God, look at the space, Dave," the man said. "It smells a little old. But for this price?" "It includes the furnishings," Silas said. But he wasn't standing next to me anymore. His voice came from the kitchen, sounding distinct, human, and alive. He was playing the role of the agent now. Previous owner was an elderly gentleman, very quiet, passed away in his sleep, peaceful. I tried to scream. Run. Get out. It's a trap. But the ink in my veins surged. My chest rose and fell in a slow, ragged rhythm that wasn't breathing, it was the house inhaling. "And this," Silas's voice moved closer, "this is the sitting room. Is that?" Sarah paused. "Is someone sitting there?" "Oh, that's just grandmother," Silas said smoothly. "She comes with the house, part of the estate terms. She's very low maintenance, just needs to be kept comfortable." Silence. A long, stretching silence where the air pressure in the room seemed to drop. "You're joking," David said, a nervous chuckle bubbling up. "The escrow is contingent on care," Silas said, his voice dropping that terrible octave, vibrating the floorboards beneath my feet. "The checks will continue to arrive in her name. You simply need to cash them." I felt the greed flare in David's mind. It was a bright, hot spark in the dark. He was doing the math. He was calculating the mortgage against the subsidy. "How much?" David asked. "Enough," Silas replied. "Enough to start over. Clean." I felt the moment the contract was signed. Not on paper, but in the spirit. They accepted the terms. The darkness around me shifted. Time began to accelerate. I sat in the chair. Days passed in blinks of static. I heard them arguing about money. I heard the baby crying, a sound that warped into the buzzing of flies. I felt the sponge bath Sarah gave me, her hands shaking, her breath shallow as she tried not to look at my sewn-shut eyes. I felt them taking. Every check they cashed was a meal for me. I grew heavy. I grew vast. The mold in the walls bloomed in patterns that spelled out my name. Then came the end, or the beginning of the next cycle. The sirens, blue and red lights flashed against the inside of my eyelids, pulsing through the thin skin. Police, open up. The door crashed inward. Heavy boots, shouting, clear left, clear right. Jesus Christ, the smell. Kitchen is secure. Sarge, you gotta see this. Footsteps approached the recliner. I sat perfectly still. My skin was tight, like parchment stretched over a drum. Is that a body? Don't touch it. Crime scene boys are on the way. Look at the wrists. Duct tape. Who is it? A pause. The rustle of paper. A wallet being opened. ID says, wait, this doesn't make sense. What? The ID in the purse next to the chair. It says Mara Graff. Missing person from the fraud case last year. And the guy in the kitchen, the one stuffed in the sink drain, David Miller, current tenant. Where's the other one? The wife? Gone. Took the baby in the checkbook. The cop exhaled. A long, shaky sound. He stepped closer to me. I could feel his body heat. I could feel his fear. It tasted like copper. Sarge, the cop whispered. I think she's smiling. I wasn't smiling. My lips were sewn shut, just like my eyes. But the house was smiling. The ledger was balanced. The phone in my lap, dead for months, suddenly lit up. The screen glowed through the gaps in my fingers. Ding, a notification. A deposit alert. Somewhere miles away, Sarah was cashing a check. The static rose up to meet me, warm and embracing. I didn't need eyes to see the future. It was all just a series of recurring payments. I waited for the lights to go out. The end.